For the past 2 years, I going to make ends meet, stretching every dollar, cutting pills in half, buying the cheapest groceries I could find. I thought that was just what aging looked like. I never imagined my own son would let me face it alone. That morning, the morning of my birthday, he drove me to a nursing home as if it were an errand. "Mom, this place will take good care of you," he said casually, like he was dropping off dry cleaning. I remember staring at him, confused. Why would I need this? I never asked for it. Before he could answer, his wife stepped out from behind him. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The way she folded her arms, the faint smirk at the corner of her mouth, something was off. Something had been off for a long time. I didn't protest. I didn't cry. I just stood there holding my small birthday bag, the one I packed myself because I thought we were going to breakfast. Instead, I was being left behind. If you're here with me, thank you. Follow my story until the end, and let me know the city you're watching from. I want to see how far the truth can travel. When the door shut behind them, a strange silence settled in the hallway. Not the peaceful kind. No, it was the heavy, suffocating kind. The kind that tells you something in your life has just cracked, even if it hasn't shattered yet. I sat on the bed they assigned to me. Thin sheets, a window facing a parking lot, a birthday balloon tied to the nightstand, probably left by staff. And for the first time, I wondered, if my son has a beautiful house, a successful job, and every comfort he could ever want, why am I here? Why am I struggling to afford basic medication while he vacations in places I only see on brochures? That question burned a small hole in my chest. But I pushed it down. I've always been proud of him. Too proud, maybe. Even as our conversations became shorter and our visits less frequent, I held on to the belief that he was still my boy. The same boy who used to run to me after school, waving his report cards. But pride can be blinding, and loneliness can be very, very quiet. I watched the clock tick for the next hour, replaying his tone, her expression, every moment that had led up to this morning. I told myself they must have had good intentions, or at least intentions that weren't cruel. Still, that whisper of doubt wouldn't leave me. A whisper that said, there's something they're not telling you. And sitting there in that small room that smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, I felt the first spark of determination flicker in my chest. I didn't know it yet, but that spark would grow into a fire neither of them could extinguish, because being abandoned on my birthday was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, the way I always did at home. Except this time, there was no familiar creak of my kitchen floor, no soft hum of my old refrigerator, no scent of the coffee I brewed weak to make it last longer. Just a quiet hallway, footsteps in the distance, and the realization that everything I'd built my life around no longer included me. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, rubbing my palms together for warmth. I'd been poor before. After my husband passed, every bill felt heavier, every grocery run more strategic. I learned to live small. I learned to manage without asking for help. And I kept telling myself that my son was simply busy, that marriage and success had pulled him into a world I didn't belong to anymore. But that morning, thinking about the nursing home, the rushed drop-off, the silence in the car, it all felt different, too intentional. I pulled my thin sweater around my shoulders and walked toward the cafeteria. I passed a nurse who smiled at me gently. "First night?" she asked. I nodded. "My son thought this would be good for me," I said quietly, tasting the words as they left my mouth. They didn't feel true. At breakfast, I watched the other residents, some chatting, some lost in thought, some staring out windows like they were waiting for someone who never came. I wondered if they had families who still called, or if they too were placed here out of convenience. As I stirred my oatmeal, my mind drifted back to months earlier. To the times my son ignored my calls but posted photos at expensive restaurants. To the Christmas Eve I spent alone because they were traveling last minute. To the birthday last year when they brought me a scarf with the tag still on it. Each moment had seemed harmless on its own. But now, strung together, they formed a pattern, one I had been too hopeful to recognize. Still, I reminded myself of the mother I had always been. Grateful, patient, understanding. I never wanted to burden him. I never wanted to be the reason he felt pressured or guilty. So why did this feel like punishment? When I returned to my room, the sunlight had shifted across the floor. My phone buzzed, a reminder about a bill I couldn't pay. I used to hide those notifications from him. I didn't want him to think I was struggling. I didn't want him to think I needed anything. But maybe that was my mistake. Being too quiet, too accommodating, too trusting. I sat by the window, watching cars pull in and out of the lot, each one carrying someone who wasn't coming for me. And somewhere beneath the sadness, beneath the confusion, something steadier began to form. A question. If my son had enough money to vacation, shop, renovate his home, if he had enough money to leave me here without hesitation, then what else did he have? What else had been decided without me? A chill crept through me, sharper than the morning air, because suddenly, why am I here? Wasn't the only question. There was another one, quieter, darker, and impossible to ignore. What have they done behind my back? That afternoon, the nursing home held a small family luncheon for residents. When the staff invited me, I almost declined. But something in me, pride maybe, wanted to sit there and pretend I still belonged somewhere. So I went. The dining room was decorated with pastel tablecloths and paper flowers. People chatted softly, waiting for their families to arrive. I sat alone at a corner table, folding and unfolding my napkin. Every few minutes, I glanced toward the entrance, though I already knew my son wouldn't walk through that door. As the room filled, laughter swelled around me. One woman's granddaughter brought her homemade cookies. Another resident's daughter fixed her mother's hair and kissed her cheek. I watched it all, smiling politely, while something hollow spread through my chest. A nurse came by and asked, "Is your family on their way?" I forced a small smile. "They're busy." The lie tasted familiar. Later that day, I drifted back to my room, wishing I could shake off the loneliness. But the quiet only made my thoughts sharper. I kept remembering the last family dinner we'd shared, maybe a month before my birthday. It was supposed to be a warm, simple meal. My son cooked steaks. My daughter-in-law arranged a charcuterie board she didn't let anyone touch. From the outside, it looked perfect, but the air had felt strained. The kind of strained you don't notice right away, only when you replay it later. I remembered how my daughter-in-law kept tapping her phone under the table, how she whispered something to my son, and he avoided my eyes afterward, how they both went quiet when I asked about visiting more often. At one point, she said, "Your house must feel too big for you now. Don't you get tired living alone?" Her tone was sweet, but her eyes weren't. I laughed it off then. But now, sitting in a nursing home, her question rang differently, like a rehearsal for something she already had planned. And then there was the moment, brief but sharp. My son asked, "Mom, did you ever think about other living arrangements?" I had answered lightly, "I'm fine where I am." But their quick exchange of glances, silent, loaded, had sliced straight through me. I hadn't understood the meaning then. I did now. Back in my room, I opened the small drawer beside the bed and placed my few belongings inside. A comb, my reading glasses, a wallet with barely anything in it. I sat down and breathed in the sterile air, letting the memories flood slowly, painfully. Every ignored call, every canceled holiday, every moment that used to feel accidental now pulsed with intention. They had been pulling away for a long time, preparing something. And I, proud and trusting, had let them. As the sun lowered outside the window, casting long shadows across the room, one thought pressed harder than the rest. This wasn't neglect. This was a plan. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the stiff mattress, watching the orange glow from the parking lot spill across the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same scenes. My daughter-in-law's tight smile, my son's hesitant gaze, the way their voices softened only when speaking to each other. I kept trying to convince myself I was overthinking, that families drift, that life gets busy, that children grow up and build their own worlds. But the memories wouldn't let me rest. One in particular kept returning. It was the afternoon I'd stopped by their house unannounced, something I rarely did. I had baked a small lemon loaf, the kind my son loved when he was younger. When I rang the bell, no one answered at first. But I could hear footsteps inside. Whispering, the kind of whispering that freezes when someone approaches the door. When my daughter-in-law finally opened it, she looked surprised. Too surprised. "Oh." "You didn't text," she said, blocking the entry with her body. I laughed it off. I brought a treat. I was in the neighborhood. She took the cake, barely glanced at it, and said they were just heading out. Except they weren't dressed to go anywhere. No coats, no keys, no shoes. I remember standing on their porch afterward, clutching my purse, feeling like an inconvenience in my own family's life. Another memory surfaced, one that stung sharper than the rest. A few years ago, after my husband died, I found an envelope in his drawer. Inside were handwritten notes, reminders he made for himself. One said, "Make sure she is protected. Make sure the house stays in her name." I had shown that note to my son. I thought it would comfort him, remind him of his father's care. But instead of comfort, he seemed bothered. He changed the subject quickly, said things were complicated now, that laws had changed, that paperwork is tricky. Back then, I believed him. Now, lying in that bed, the weight of every ignored detail pressed onto my chest. I got up and paced the room, the cold floor steadying my thoughts. Memories slid into place like puzzle pieces. My daughter-in-law's probing questions about my house, the sudden interest in my health, the gentle nudges to think long-term, her frequent comments about assisted living being the responsible choice. It was all too aligned, too neat. And the strangest part? My son wasn't cruel. He wasn't heartless, but he was easily influenced, especially by the woman he thought he couldn't live without. I sat back on the bed and rubbed my temples. For the first time, I wondered if they had touched my paperwork, if something had changed without my knowledge, if I had signed something I didn't understand during those months when grief had made everything blurry. The thought sent a coldness through me deeper than any winter wind. I whispered into the quiet room, "What did you two do?" The air didn't answer. It didn't need to, because deep down I already knew. They hadn't just pushed me away. They'd prepared for it. The next morning, after a night of circling thoughts, I decided to take a walk down the main hallway. I moved slowly, listening to the soft hum of televisions behind half-closed doors, the shuffle of slippers on linoleum. I passed a bulletin board filled with family photos, smiling children, holiday gatherings, birthday parties. I wondered how many of those residents remembered the last time their families showed up. How many had been promised things that never came true? When I reached the lounge area, I found an older woman knitting near the window. She looked up and gave me a warm, tired smile, the kind only someone who has survived too much can offer. "First week?" she asked. I nodded. "My son brought me here, for my birthday." She paused, her knitting needles still in her hands. "Ah," she said softly, as if she knew exactly what that meant. "Families make choices, not always good ones." Her words lingered with me as I made my way to the small library. I sat at one of the tables and opened my purse, searching for a pen. Instead, I found something I had nearly forgotten, an unopened envelope from my husband's old accountant. It had arrived months after the funeral, but I had been too overwhelmed to go through every document at the time. I must have slipped it into my purse after one of my visits to my son's house. I opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a brief letter, along with a copy of a financial summary. There were notes about accounts I didn't recognize, assets I didn't remember discussing, and a reminder about a pending update that was supposed to be handled with my consent. My throat tightened. With my consent. But I had never given it. I scanned the dates. Some were recent. Too recent. Months after my husband's passing. Months after those strange visits to my son's home. Months when I wasn't thinking clearly, when grief fogged everything. I remembered sitting at their kitchen table one afternoon, my daughter-in-law sliding papers toward me. "Just routine updates," she had said, her tone sugary sweet. "Sign here and here. We're trying to help you stay organized." I had signed because I trusted them, because I thought family protected family. Sitting in that quiet library, my hands trembled. I tried to steady them by clasping them together, but the tremor stayed. A voice interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "You dropped this," someone said. I looked up. A young nurse held out a paper I hadn't realized slipped from the envelope, a small note unreadable without my glasses. She smiled politely and walked away. I unfolded it. It was a reminder from the accountant. Please review changes before authorizing. Do not sign without full explanation. I leaned back in my chair, air leaving my lungs slowly. I hadn't reviewed anything. No one had explained anything. They had waited until I was vulnerable, confused, grieving, and tired, and then handed me documents. I pressed the papers flat on the table and stared at the signatures. Mine, shaky and rushed. Another signature I recognized but dreaded seeing. My daughter-in-law's, marked as a witness. A heaviness settled in my chest, not from age or illness, but from clarity. This wasn't thoughtlessness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was preparation. A plan carried out step by silent step. And for the first time since arriving at the nursing home, anger, not loud but quiet and steady, began to take root. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that sharpens. I sat there in the library for a long time, the papers spread out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I had ignored for too long. Every line I read made one thing clearer. They hadn't just pushed me aside. They had built the path that led here. Quietly, carefully, confident that I would never question any of it. By noon, the hallway grew livelier as residents moved toward lunch. I gathered the papers, folded them neatly, and slipped them back into my purse. My hands were steadier now. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because fear had finally turned into something else. Something firmer. When I reached the cafeteria, I chose a small table near the back. As I ate, I listened to the conversations around me. Stories about grandchildren, holiday visits, phone calls. Some joyful, some bitter. I wondered how many of us had been slowly written out of our own families' lives. A resident named Margaret sat beside me. She had bright eyes that hadn't dulled with age. "You look like you're carrying something heavy," she said gently. I gave a small smile. "I think I'm starting to understand more than I wanted to." She nodded as if she'd heard the same sentence many times. Clarity comes late, but it always comes. After lunch, I walked back toward my room, passing a bulletin board advertising weekly outings, bingo games, group crafts, things meant to give structure to people's lives. Lives that had once been full of purpose. I wondered if my son had assumed I would simply settle into that rhythm. If he imagined I would fade quietly into a routine that made me easier to forget. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. Back in my room, I laid the documents onto the bed. I read each line slowly, tracing dates and signatures with my finger. That's when I noticed something else. An authorization form that referenced an account I had never accessed. It had my signature, but the handwriting was wrong. The loops too tight, the slant unfamiliar. A noise caught in my throat, not a cry, but a breath that felt scraped raw. I dug through my purse and found an old notepad with my real signature. I placed the pages side by side. The difference was obvious. Anyone could see it. Anyone honest, at least. My daughter-in-law's name appeared as a witness again. I closed my eyes, and the memories returned sharply. Her hovering over my shoulder as I signed papers, her guiding my hand toward the lines, her reassuring voice saying, "Don't worry, this is all standard." Standard for who? I sat down on the edge of the bed, grounding myself with a slow inhale. The walls felt closer than before, but my mind felt wider, more awake. Every quiet moment over the past 2 years now had an echo. Every ignored call, every rescheduled visit, every time she insisted on helping with my mail. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a long, winding road they had paved one brick at a time, and I had walked it willingly, trusting the son I raised, trusting the woman he married. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. Cars moved in and out of the lot, each one going somewhere. Mine would too, eventually. But not yet. Not before I uncovered everything. Not before I took back the pieces of my life that had been quietly moved out of my reach. I folded the papers carefully, placing them back into the envelope. My voice was barely above a whisper, steady as the truth forming inside me. They think I'm alone. They think I'm weak. I pressed the envelope flat under my hand. They're wrong. That afternoon, while I was sitting in the lounge with the envelope tucked safely in my sweater pocket, one of the aides approached me. "You have a visitor," she said. My heart jumped, then immediately settled. It wouldn't be my son. It wouldn't be her. They had gotten what they wanted. There was no reason for them to come back. But when I looked toward the entrance, I saw someone I hadn't expected at all. It was Mr. Hill, my husband's old accountant. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders more hunched, but his eyes were still sharp. He walked toward me with a cautious sort of urgency. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I've been trying to reach you." I gestured for him to sit. "I've been away," I replied, glancing around the nursing home. He nodded slowly, as if that single glance told him everything. "I figured something wasn't right," he said quietly. "Your number kept going straight to voicemail. And when I called your son, he said you were transitioning to assisted care. His tone didn't sit well with me." That was the first crack of validation, the first sign that I wasn't imagining everything. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. "I think you should see these. Records, forms, emails, some involving your daughter-in-law." His voice softened. "Your husband trusted you with more than you realize." My fingers hovered over the folder, trembling. "Did they change anything?" He sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "Your primary account still lists you as sole owner, but there were attempts, multiple attempts, to alter access. They were blocked because the signatures didn't match." I reported them. The room around us faded, the soft chatter, the television humming in the background, the clinking of dishes from the cafeteria. All I heard was that one sentence. "They tried. More than once." My breath tightened. "They told me everything was routine," I whispered. "Nothing about this was routine," he said. "Your husband left safeguards in place. He knew you'd be vulnerable after his passing. He wanted to make sure no one could take advantage of you." I felt something inside me ache, deep, old, and loyal. My husband wasn't here to shield me, but somehow, even in death, he had tried. Mr. Hill reached into the folder again. "There's something else." He placed a printed email on the table. "Your daughter-in-law reached out to our office. She wanted copies of your financial statements forwarded to her personal email. She claimed she was managing your affairs." He paused. "We declined." I stared at the page, the words blurred, not from tears, but from a cold clarity settling into place. They weren't guessing. They weren't curious. They were preparing. Mr. Hill leaned in, lowering his voice. "I don't want to overstep, but whatever they're planning, it isn't small." I folded the email, placed it with the others, and slipped everything back into the envelope. My movements were slow, deliberate. "Thank you," I said softly. He placed a hand over mine, gentle but steady. "You're not alone, and you're not powerless." When he left, I sat there for a long time, the envelope heavy in my lap. The nursing home suddenly felt less like a resting place and more like a holding box, somewhere they could store me while they finished whatever they had started. But the thing about putting someone away is that you assume they'll stay quiet. I looked out the window at the fading light. Quiet didn't mean defeated. And now I knew the truth. Now I knew exactly where to begin. I sat in my room with the door slightly open, listening to the shuffle of carts and the murmur of residents moving through their routines. None of them knew the storm unfolding quietly in my lap. I held the envelope against my chest for a moment, before laying it flat on the small table by the window. The sun was lowering, stretching long shadows across the floor, turning everything a shade of gold that made the dust in the air look almost alive. I took a breath and opened the envelope again. This time, I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for a direction. The conversation with Mr. Hill had stirred something inside me. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of steady resolve I hadn't felt in years. I smoothed the papers out, lined them up neatly, and began writing down names, dates, and details on a notepad the nursing home kept near the phone. Each point made the picture clearer. My son and his wife had been planning my removal long before my birthday. And they weren't done yet. I circled the date of the forged signature. Then I circled the date my son suggested, other living arrangements. Then the family dinner. Then the visit to their house. One by one, the moments connected, like stepping stones showing the path they wanted me to walk, straight out of my home and into this facility. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. A nurse peeked inside. "We're starting evening recreation soon. Bingo tonight," she said kindly. I smiled politely. "I'll pass tonight. Thank you." As she left, I turned back to the window. Outside, families were picking up residents for dinner outings. A daughter guiding her father's wheelchair. A son lifting his mother into the passenger seat. I watched them quietly. That should have been my life. That should have been my evening. Instead, I was here. Alone, unraveling the truth piece by piece. I reached into my purse for my phone. Part of me expected no service, but the signal was strong. I scrolled through my recent calls. Most were outgoing attempts to reach my son. Few were answered. None were returned with warmth. The last text from my daughter-in-law was a single line from months ago. "We'll handle things. Just focus on yourself." Now I understood what "handle things" meant. I opened the banking app, a habit I'd formed long ago, even when I had barely anything to check. The login screen stared back at me. My fingers hovered over the passcode before I typed it in. When the account loaded, the balance made me pause. It was more than I remembered. A lot more. My husband's safeguards. Tears didn't come, but something inside me softened. He had trusted me enough to leave the pieces I needed, and he had trusted the right people. Mr. Hill, the accountant, people who still honored his intentions even after he was gone. I scrolled through recent activity. There were no transfers, no unauthorized attempts. But the linked access request section showed a list of declined attempts from my daughter-in-law's email. 7. 7 times she had tried. I locked the screen, set the phone down, and folded my hands in my lap. For a moment, I just breathed, slowly, deeply, letting the truth settle. Then another thought surfaced, quiet and sharp. If they had planned this much already, what were they planning next? I stood, straightened my sweater, and slipped the phone and envelope back into my purse. The room felt smaller now, but my resolve felt bigger. They wanted me tucked away. They wanted me silent. They wanted me out of the way while they waited for the perfect moment to make their final move. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I walked down the hall toward the front desk, each step steadier than the last. It was time to start planning, too. I walked to the front desk with my purse held close, the same way I used to carry grocery bags through winter storms. Tight, steady, determined not to drop anything. The receptionist looked up with a bright smile. "Everything okay, hon?" she asked. "Yes," I said gently. "I just need a copy of my ID and a quiet place to make a few calls." She didn't question it. Older women making careful decisions wasn't unusual here. She printed my ID, handed it to me, and pointed toward a small alcove near the vending machines. I thanked her and walked over, each step feeling more deliberate than the last. Once seated, I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was one number I hadn't dialed in years. My husband's old attorney. He had handled our wills, our home title, our insurance policies. He was meticulous and patient, the kind of man who never rushed through explanations. My fingers hesitated, then pressed call. He answered on the third ring. "This is Mark Stevens." "Mark," I said quietly, "it's me." There was a soft pause, recognition, then concern. "I haven't heard from you in a long time. Are you all right?" I looked around the alcove. No one was nearby. "I think I need help," I said. "I believe something has been changed around my paperwork. Maybe behind my back." He didn't ask unnecessary questions, just exhaled slowly, the way someone does when they've anticipated a storm. "Tell me everything." I told him about the nursing home drop-off, about the forged signature, about the repeated attempts to access my accounts, about my daughter-in-law presenting papers disguised as routine updates. I kept my voice calm, flat almost, but inside, my hands were curled tight around the truth. When I finished, the line was silent for several seconds. Then, he spoke. "I suspected something was off," he said. "Your son contacted our office last year asking about the terms of your will. He wasn't entitled to that information. I refused to share anything without you present." A coldness spread down my arms. "He never told me." "I know," Mark said, "and that's why we need to act quickly." He asked me to verify my current location, my ID, and a few security questions only my husband would have known to set up. When it was done, he cleared his throat. "Here's the good news," he said. "Your original will is intact, untouched. Your house is still in your name. Your retirement account is protected. But the bad news is there have been ongoing attempts to override certain clauses." "How close did they get?" I whispered. "Too close for comfort," he admitted, "but not close enough." I closed my eyes, letting that sink in. There was relief, but the kind that sits beside dread, not replacing it. "Listen carefully," he continued. "I'm sending you a temporary document that will lock down everything. Every account, every property, every legal right. No one can touch anything without your physical signature and a witness chosen by you." "Can I sign it here?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I'll email it within the hour. Print it at the front desk. Do not let anyone else handle it." I nodded, even though he couldn't see. And after that? After that, he said, his voice steady as iron, we're going to make sure your son and his wife understand something very clearly. What's that? I asked. That you're not as easy to remove as they planned. When I hung up, I stayed seated for a moment, letting the vending machine hum fill the silence. Then I rose, smoothing down my sweater, and walked back toward the front desk. My heartbeat wasn't fast. My hands weren't shaking. This wasn't fear. This was the beginning of taking my life back, quietly, firmly, and step by step. By the time the documents arrived in my email, the sky outside had shifted into a pale evening blue. I walked back to the front desk, calm and deliberate, and asked if they could print something for me. The receptionist nodded, took my phone, and sent the file to the printer behind her. She didn't ask a single question. Another quiet mercy. When she handed me the papers, warm from the machine, I felt a strange stillness wash over me. These weren't just documents. They were a line drawn in the sand. I carried them back to my room, closed the door gently, and sat at the small desk beside the window. The lamp's yellow light made the text glow faintly. I read each page slowly, letting every clause settle into my bones. It was all there. Restrictions, authorizations, protections. Walls being built brick by brick around everything they had tried to reach. The final page was a signature line. My hand hovered over it for a moment. Then I signed, slow, steady, my real handwriting, the one I had used my whole life. When it was done, I pressed my palm flat against the page, sealing the moment in my memory. For the first time since my birthday morning, a piece of peace slipped into my chest. I scanned the document with my phone, emailed it back to Mark, and waited. It took him less than 5 minutes to reply. Everything is locked. They can't touch a thing. I set the phone down and let the weight of his words settle. Not relief. Something deeper. Something like reclaiming a part of myself I had forgotten I still owned. As the night deepened, I decided to take a short walk through the hallway. The nursing home was quieter at this hour, softer. A TV flickered in one room, someone sang faintly in another. The world felt small, but I didn't feel small in it. When I returned to my room, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. The first one in days. Mom, we're coming tomorrow. There are some things we need to go over. Just that. No apology, no explanation, not even a question about how I was adjusting. I stared at the message for a long moment. The boldness of it. The entitlement. As if I were an item on a to-do list they needed to finish. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted it too. Finally, I wrote something simple. I'll be ready. I placed the phone face down on the table. My pulse wasn't racing. My breath wasn't unsteady. Because I wasn't afraid of their visit, not anymore. They were coming to finalize whatever plan they thought they had in motion. They didn't know the ground had shifted. They didn't know the locks had changed. They didn't know the woman waiting for them tomorrow wasn't the same one they left here. I turned off the lamp and lay down in the quiet darkness. Tomorrow, they would walk through those doors thinking they were in control. Tomorrow, they would learn they weren't. Not even close. They arrived earlier than I expected. My son and his wife walking into the nursing home with the same brisk, rehearsed energy I'd seen 100 times before. My son scanned the lobby, looking for me, while she kept her sunglasses on indoors, as if that could hide the tension in her jaw. I stood from the armchair near the window, smoothing the front of my sweater. Mom, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She didn't bother pretending. We need to talk, she said, her voice clipped. I nodded and led them to a small visitor's room down the hall. It was quiet there, a simple table, 2 chairs, and a soft buzzing from the overhead light. They sat. I remained standing. My son cleared his throat. We've been thinking. It's time to formalize things. About your care. About the house. About... The house, I repeated gently, lowering myself into a chair. He hesitated, glancing at his wife, who stepped in like she had been waiting for the cue. It doesn't make sense for you to keep it anymore, she said. You're here now, and selling it would help cover future expenses. It's the responsible thing. I watched her closely. Her confidence, her assumption that I would nod and agree. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. My son added, We brought the paperwork. It's straightforward. Just signatures. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't stumble. I simply looked at them, really looked at them. The urgency in her, the guilt he tried to hide, the expectation that I would still be the woman who signed anything they placed in front of me. She opened her purse and pulled out a folder, the same kind they'd brought to me before. She slid it across the table. "Just read it," she said. I didn't touch it. Instead, I reached into my own purse and laid down the documents Mark sent me, clean, crisp, stamped, and already filed. Their eyes flicked to them immediately. "What's that?" my son asked, his voice tightening. "Protection," I said calmly. His wife leaned forward, trying to read upside down. When she realized what she was seeing, legal language that shut every door she had tried to pry open, her face drained of color. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I secured what was mine," I answered. "The house stays with me. My accounts stay with me. No one can access anything without my approval." My son's shoulders stiffened, confusion flickering into panic. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" "Why would I tell the people who tried 7 times to access my accounts?" I said softly. He blinked, once, twice, and then he looked at her, really looked at her. "You told me it was routine," he said, voice cracking. She didn't answer. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was cold, heavy, real. I gathered my papers, slid them back into my purse, and stood. "I'm leaving this facility," I said. "Not today, but soon. And where I go next doesn't involve either of you." My son stood quickly. "Mom, wait." I shook my head. "I raised you better than this, but I can't fix what you allowed." His wife finally spoke. "You can't just—" "Yes," I said quietly. "I can." I stepped past them, hand on the doorknob. Before walking out, I looked back one last time. "I may be old," I said, "but I'm not blind, and I'm not done." Then I opened the door and left them sitting in the room, surrounded by the plans they thought were airtight, now collapsing around them. For the first time in a long time, my steps felt light. I left them in that visitor's room without looking back. The hallway felt longer than usual, but my steps were steady, almost quiet enough to disappear into the rhythm of the place. A nurse passed me and smiled. I nodded, letting the normalcy of her warmth wash over me for a moment. It reminded me that kindness still existed, just not always in the places we expect. When I reached my room, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. My purse was still warm from being held. I rested my hand on it, feeling the outline of the papers inside, protections, boundaries, a future I had reclaimed piece by piece. I breathed deeply, letting the silence settle. Not the heavy silence from days earlier, the one filled with fear and confusion, but a quieter, cleaner one, a silence that belonged to someone who finally understood her own strength. For a long time, I thought survival meant enduring, keeping my head down, staying grateful for whatever scraps of affection family gave. But somewhere between being dropped off on my birthday and signing those documents that safeguarded my life, something shifted. Survival had a new definition now. I stood and began packing the few belongings I had brought. A sweater, a hairbrush, the lemon-scented lotion I used sparingly. Each item went into my bag calmly, not with urgency, but with purpose. A soft knock came at the door. It was the same nurse who'd smiled at me earlier. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. "I'm fine," I said, and for the first time since arriving here, the words were true. She stepped in slightly. "Your son looked upset when he left." I gave a faint smile. "Some truths take a while to settle." She nodded, not pressing further. I appreciated that. When she left, I zipped my purse and sat in the chair by the window. Cars moved through the parking lot, headlights sweeping over the pavement. Families coming and going, lives moving forward. And mine would too. I dialed Mark, just to confirm next steps. He answered on the first ring. "I read everything you sent," he said. "You're in complete control now. When you're ready, I'll arrange transportation and help you relocate. You don't owe anyone explanations." "Good," I said softly. "I think I've given enough." When I hung up, I looked at my phone, at the message thread with my son. All the unanswered calls, the ignored invitations, the one-sided effort. I didn't delete the thread, but I didn't open it either. Some wounds don't close because we stitch them back together. They close because we finally stop reopening them. The next morning, I walked out of the nursing home on my own 2 feet. No one escorted me. No one hovered. The air outside was cool and steady, brushing against my face like a quiet welcome. A car pulled up, arranged by Mark, and I stepped in, setting my purse on my lap. As we drove away, the building grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Not a place of abandonment anymore, but a place of clarity, a place where the truth had finally spoken loud enough for me to hear. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't look back, because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do at my age isn't to fight her family. It's to walk away from the ones who believed she couldn't. And as the road opened in front of me, steady and quiet, I whispered a simple truth to myself. A truth I had earned. I'm still here, and I'm finally choosing me.